Have you ever wondered why, for over 1,000 years, one group of people was repeatedly kicked out of almost every country they lived in across Europe? From England in 1290 to Spain in 1492, and countless places in between, Jewish communities faced expulsion after expulsion. It's a dark and complex chapter of history, but understanding it is crucial to grasping the world we live in today. So, what were the real reasons behind this millennium of persecution? Let's dive deep and unpack the tangled web of religion, economics, and politics that led to these tragic events. To understand the expulsions, we first need to go back to the early days of Christianity. Initially, Judaism and Christianity were closely related, but as Christianity grew and became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, a separation occurred. A tragic and devastatingly influential idea began to take hold: the charge of deicide, the accusation that the Jewish people were collectively responsible for the death of Jesus. This false and dangerous narrative was preached from pulpits and became deeply embedded in the European psyche. It painted Jews not just as non-believers, but as the enemies of Christ. This religious hostility created a fundamental otherness, setting the stage for centuries of suspicion and discrimination. Jewish people were often forbidden from owning land or joining most professions. They were seen as outsiders in their own homelands, a people apart, which made them easy targets when things went wrong. As we move into the Middle Ages, this religious tension starts to mix with economics, creating an even more volatile situation. Because many professions were closed off to them by guilds and laws, many Jews turned to occupations that were available. One of the most significant of these was money lending. In medieval Christian society, the church had strict prohibitions against usury, which is the practice of lending money at interest. This created a huge economic problem. Kings needed money to fund wars, merchants needed capital to buy goods, and nobles needed loans to maintain their lavish lifestyles. Who could provide this essential service? The Jewish community. Because they weren't bound by the church's rules on usury, they stepped in to fill this critical economic gap. But this role, while essential, was also incredibly dangerous. It meant that many prominent and powerful people, including kings and nobles, ended up owing large sums of money to Jewish lenders. This created a powerful and resentful group of debtors. Think about it. What's an easy way to cancel your debts? Get rid of your creditor. This economic resentment fueled a toxic stereotype: the greedy Jewish moneylender. It was a caricature that ignored the fact that they were forced into this role and provided a vital service. When a king was deeply in debt, it became politically and financially convenient to simply expel the entire Jewish population. By doing so, the crown could seize all their assets and cancel all its debts in one fell swoop. It was a brutal but effective short-term solution for rulers who had mismanaged their finances. We see this pattern repeat itself over and over again, from France to England and across the German states. The economic success of some Jews, born out of restriction, ironically became one of the primary justifications for their removal. Now let us add a third layer to this toxic mix: political instability and the rise of nationalism. In the medieval and early modern periods, European rulers were constantly trying to consolidate their power and forge unified national identities. They wanted their kingdoms to be homogeneous: one king, one law, and most importantly, one faith. In this context, the Jewish community, with its distinct religion, culture, and traditions, was seen as a foreign element within the body politic. They didn't fit neatly into the new model of a unified Christian nation-state. This is where the idea of the scapegoat becomes so important. Whenever a society faced a crisis, whether it was a plague, a famine, a military defeat, or economic hardship, it was easy for leaders to deflect blame from themselves and onto a visible minority. The Jewish people were the perfect scapegoats. Already viewed with religious suspicion and economic resentment, they could be blamed for almost any problem. Did the Black Death sweep through Europe? Rumors spread like wildfire that Jews had poisoned the wells. Was there a crop failure? It must be a divine punishment for tolerating non-believers. By blaming and then expelling the Jews, rulers could create a false sense of unity and purpose among the Christian majority. It was a cynical political tool used to rally the population, distract from the real issues, and consolidate the ruler's own power. The Spanish Inquisition and the subsequent 1492 expulsion from Spain are perhaps the most famous examples of this, where Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand sought to create a purely Catholic Spain by forcing Jews to convert or leave. Let's look at some specific, key moments in this long and tragic history. One of the first major expulsions was from England in 1290 by King Edward I. For years, the English crown had heavily taxed the Jewish community, using them as a source of revenue. But by the late 13th century, after squeezing them dry and facing pressure from indebted barons, Edward saw more value in expelling them. He issued the Edict of Expulsion, forcing all Jews to leave the country. They wouldn't be officially allowed to return for over 350 years. Then we have France, which had a particularly volatile history with its Jewish population. They were expelled in 1182, then invited back when the royal treasury needed them, only to be expelled again in 1306, then readmitted, and then expelled once more in 1394. This cruel cycle shows just how much the Jewish community was treated as a political and economic tool, to be used and discarded at the whim of the monarch. Of course, the most infamous expulsion is the one from Spain in 1492. The Alhambra Decree gave the entire Jewish population of Spain, one of the oldest and most integrated in Europe, a horrifying choice: convert to Catholicism or leave the country within 4 months, leaving most of their wealth behind. Tens of thousands were forced into exile, creating the Sephardic diaspora across the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and other parts of Europe. This wasn't just about debt, it was the culmination of a fanatical drive for religious and national purity. These events weren't isolated incidents. Similar expulsions happened in Hungary, Austria, Portugal, and numerous city-states across Germany and Italy. Each time, the reasons were a similar cocktail of religious bigotry, economic jealousy, and political maneuvering. The long-term consequences were devastating. For Jewish communities, it meant the constant loss of home, property, and life, and a perpetual state of insecurity. For Europe, it meant a recurring loss of a skilled and dynamic part of its population, a brain drain that benefited other places, like the welcoming Ottoman Empire, which saw its economy and culture enriched by the influx of skilled Sephardic exiles. The cycle of expulsion and persecution didn't end with the Middle Ages. While the Enlightenment brought new ideas of tolerance, old prejudices died hard. The patterns of scapegoating and othering persisted, mutating into new forms. In the 19th century, religious anti-Judaism evolved into racial anti-Semitism, which argued that Jews were an inferior and dangerous race, regardless of their religious beliefs. This new, pseudo-scientific form of hatred didn't care if a person converted; it claimed their Jewishness was in their blood. This laid the ideological groundwork for the unimaginable horrors of the 20th century, the centuries of seeing Jews as Christ killers, greedy moneylenders, and disloyal outsiders created a culture where the Holocaust became possible. It was the horrific culmination of a millennium of dehumanization. So, to answer our initial question, why were Jews expelled for 1,000 years? There is no single, simple answer. It was a complex and tragic interplay of 3 main forces. First, deep-rooted religious animosity that painted Jews as outsiders and enemies of the dominant faith. Second, economic resentment, where their forced role as moneylenders made them convenient targets for indebted rulers and nobles. And third, political opportunism, where they were used as scapegoats to unify nations and distract from the failures of their leaders. This 1,000-year history is a sobering reminder of how easily societies can turn on a minority and the devastating consequences of prejudice, intolerance, and hate. Understanding this past isn't just about remembering history, it's about recognizing these dangerous patterns so we can fight against them today. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.